The storm had been building since noon, pressing down over the Ashfin Range with the particular, sullen weight of a sky that had decided to break something. I had ridden out with 4 of my border guards because the Ashfin Pass was known to collapse in that kind of weather, not dramatically, not with one great crack, but slowly, rock by rock, a narrowing, until anything caught inside it was simply gone. The pass had been quiet for 9 years. We checked it out of habit, the way you check an old wound that healed well but that you do not entirely trust in cold weather. I almost did not see her. She was standing at the eastern mouth of the pass, where the mountain track leveled out onto the frozen grassland of Vornsted's border plain. She had stopped walking and she was very still, and the snow was coming down hard enough that she had already whitened along the shoulders and the crown of her head, which meant she had been standing there for some time. She was not looking at the pass behind her. She was looking at the sky above my kingdom, studying it, I realized, the way a navigator studies a coastline, counting what she could see, measuring what she could not. My horse slowed without my asking it to. The guards pulled up behind me. She wore a traveling coat of faded brown wool, heavy, but not heavy enough for what the night was becoming. A pack was strapped to her back, a worn thing, well-made, cinched tight in the way of someone who had packed and repacked it enough times to know exactly how to distribute the weight over a long walk. At her belt, a row of small leather pouches, each one tied differently, some with a simple knot, some with a longer wrap. Herbs, I would later understand, dried in neat bundles and organized by method, so she could carry an entire season's work in the space of a hand and still find the one she needed without looking. She had no sword, no wolf beside her, no pack mark on her collar or her sleeve. Nothing about her said she belonged to any of the territories I knew, including mine. She turned when she heard the horses, and she did not run. Most outsiders, catching sight of 4 mounted Vornsted border riders bearing down through a snowstorm, ran, or dropped to their knees, or shouted something frantic about papers and passage rights and the name of whoever had sent them, speaking very quickly in the hope that if enough information came out in the first 10 seconds, there would be no reason to do anything threatening. She did none of those things. She simply turned, looked at us directly, and waited. Her face was cold, actually cold, the skin at her jaw already edging toward the kind of pale that meant the cold was getting in, but her expression was composed. She had the look of someone running a rapid calculation, riders, number, bearing, weapons, speed. Not afraid. Assessing. I pulled up 3 lengths from her. "The pass is closing," I said. "You cannot go back through it tonight." "I know," she said. I knew when the second shelf came down behind me. I kept walking because going back meant the same risk as going forward, and going forward brought me to flatter ground. She looked at me steadily. I may have miscalculated how cold the flat ground was going to be. One of my guards made a sound that was almost a laugh. I silenced him with a look. "Where do you come from?" I asked. "Ashfin Settlement, the eastern side." She named it simply, as though it were a common thing. It was not. The eastern settlements across the Ashfin Range had been isolated since the Great Rock Falls 60 years ago, not deliberately cut off, simply unreachable by the usual roads. We knew they existed in the way you know of things you cannot reach. By old record, by the occasional mention in century-old correspondence, by a line in the border maps that said eastern settlements, unconfirmed, beyond standard trade routes. We had not had contact with them in my father's lifetime, nor his father's. "What brought you across?" I said. She looked at me steadily. "The settlement is gone. A flood took the lower quarter in autumn, and then the upper quarter went in the first frost when the hillside it was built into gave way. There are 11 people left. They are sheltering in the community store building, which is stone-built and held, but it was built for goods, not for a winter's habitation. They have food enough for another month, perhaps 6 weeks if they are careful." She paused. "I came ahead to find whether there is room for 11 people in whatever is on this side of the mountains." She said it without drama, as though she were reporting the weather, as though this were an ordinary assessment of a logistical matter, not a woman who had walked alone through a mountain pass in a closing storm to ask for help on behalf of 11 people who had sent her because she was the one they trusted to find it. I was the Alpha King of Vornstead. I had a fortress large enough to house 400, with rooms that had stood empty since my brother's household had moved to the Southern Territories 3 years past. I had a kingdom that had not received a border-crossing traveler from the Ashfin East in 60 years, and a council that was going to have something pointed to say about a wolfless outsider appearing at the border the week before my betrothal ceremony. I also had a pack that had been stable and well-governed for 14 years precisely, because I did not make decisions in the cold. "You can shelter tonight," I said, "then we speak in the morning." I did not miss the slight loosening of her shoulders, not relief exactly. More a careful, quiet release of something she had been holding very tightly for a very long time. She inclined her head. "Thank you." She rode pillion behind one of my guards. She was light enough that the horse barely shifted its weight to compensate. She said nothing the whole ride back to the fortress, and she looked at everything, the plains, the ridge line, the outer wall, the gate with its carved wolves, the way the torches were set into the stone, the pattern of lights in the windows above, with the particular attention of someone memorizing what they might need to describe later to 11 people sheltering on the wrong side of a mountain, who were waiting to hear that there was somewhere for them to go. Her name was Lyra. I learned that in the gateway, when the gatekeeper asked for a name to write in the register. "Lyra," she said, "no pack name." The keeper hesitated, pen lifted. Every name in the Vornstead register had a pack name behind it. The name told you the lineage, the standing, the pack bond. Without one, the entry was incomplete by law. He looked at me with the expression of a man who knew what was required, and also knew that the Alpha King was standing 3 feet away and had already decided something. "Write it as given," I said. He did. I put her in the east wing. It was the warmest quarter of the fortress in winter, because the kitchen fires backed against its walls, and it had not been used in several years. The east wing had belonged, by tradition, to the pack's chosen healer, and our last healer had retired and moved to her son's household in the south, and the position had not been filled since. I told the head steward, Perla, to see to food and dry clothing and a fire, and that she was to be treated as a guest until the morning. I also told Perla to make sure there was fresh water, and whatever herbs or medicines the East Wing's cabinet still held, because a woman who had walked through the Ashfin Pass in a closing snowstorm in a coat that was not warm enough was going to need more than one hot meal to be fully well. The council meeting was already waiting for me in the northern hall. I will not pretend it went smoothly. My council, 6 elders, 3 pack-born wolves who served as my lore readers, and Austin, my head of border affairs, who had the personality of a closed iron gate and the memory of an archivist, were united in their objection. A wolfless outsider, no pack name, no standing in Vornstead law. Arrived unannounced at the border, through a pass that everyone knew was dangerous in winter, 1 week before the Alpha King's betrothal ceremony to Lady Marin of the Solvin Pack. A match that had taken 3 years to negotiate and 2 more to arrange, and that would join 2 of the great northern territories in a stable alliance that would secure Vornstead's eastern border trade for a generation. "She stays until the pass is safe," I said. "Then we address her people's situation formally. There are 11 survivors across the Ashfin Range. They are our eastern neighbors by geography, whatever the old records say about contact. They have been isolated by circumstance for 60 years, not by any act of their own. They are in need of assistance. We will provide it." Austin pressed his mouth together in the way that meant he had 4 separate arguments and was deciding which one to lead with. "The law requires." "I know what the law requires, Austin. I had been Alpha King for 14 years. I had read every law in the Vornstead Code twice, once when my father was teaching me and once after he died, and I needed to actually use them. The law also requires hospitality to those who cross our borders in need, under the old codes. Write both down and we will see which one speaks louder. He wrote both down. The meeting ended with the wolf's eye look that meant the argument had been tabled, not resolved. I had gotten good at reading that look over 14 years. It meant Austin was going to find another approach and bring it back to me within 48 hours, which he did, which I resolved the same way, and this went on 3 more times over the following week. I went to my own chambers that first night and thought about the border logistics, the crossing, the 11 people, the supply question, the route. I thought about the ceremony a week away. I thought about what Marin's retinue would make of a wolfless outsider in the East Wing, and whether it was manageable and how to present it. I thought about all of these things as a king thinks about matters of state, with the part of the mind that is very practiced at it, turning the problem this way and that to find its shape. I did not, I told myself, think about the way she had looked at the fortress gate, or the way she had said 12 people, 11 and herself, and corrected it to 11 without any visible feeling, as though she had simply been carrying one extra number since whatever morning the floods had made the count necessary. That was what I told myself. Then morning came, and with it Perla, who informed me with a particular careful expression. The expression she used when she was about to say something she knew I would need a moment with, that there were wolves in the East Wing. Not one wolf, 7. 7 of the pack's younger wolves, the ones who ran the inner courtyard in the pre-dawn hours and were ordinarily dispersed to their dens by the time the fortress proper woke, had apparently spent the night outside the East Wing door. The door had not opened. The wolves had not been called. They had not been fed anything. The kitchen did not begin work until an hour after they were found. Perla had come through the East Wing on her morning round and found them there at first light, arranged in a loose half-circle around the threshold, with the settled patience of creatures that had been there long enough to choose comfortable positions, and they had declined to move until she had gone and fetched treats from the kitchen, at which point they had dispersed with a certain reluctant quality, as though they were doing her a favor. "Has this happened before?" I asked. "Not in my memory," said Perla. She had been Vornsted's head steward for 22 years. Her memory was reliable. I went to the East Wing. Lyra was awake and seated at the small table near the fire with a bowl of porridge going slightly cold beside her, sorting her dried herbs into a careful order on the table's surface. She had already repacked the larger bundles and was now arranging the smaller pouches by something I could not immediately identify. Scent, I thought, or use, or both, or some classification system she carried in her head that she had built over years of practice. She looked up when I came in with the same direct expression she had used in the past, not startled, not performative, simply present. "Your wolves sat outside my door last night," she said. "I heard." "I did not invite them." She said it plainly, not defensively, not a protest, not an apology, not a bid for sympathy. More a piece of information she thought I might need in order to understand the situation correctly. "I know," I said. "They do things like this sometimes. It means nothing." Even as I said it, it did not sound entirely right. I had been telling myself it meant nothing since Perla had told me, and each time I said it, it meant it a little less convincingly. 7 wolves, outside a closed door, having gone there without being called or led or given any reason I could identify, sitting through the night with the patience of creatures who had decided something was worth waiting for. It meant something. I simply was not ready to say what. I asked her about the settlement. She told me, precisely and without sentiment, the sequence of disasters. The flood in autumn when the river that ran through the lower quarter overflowed its banks in the first of the season's heavy rains and did not stop for 3 days. The frost in early winter that found the damage the flood had left in the hillside structure and used it. The collapse. The count of who had made it to the store building. She described the elderly couple and the pregnant woman with the specificity of someone who had been caring for them, and knew exactly what they needed, and how long the current situation could reasonably hold. I asked about the terrain. She described it as well as any border scout I had debriefed, better in some ways because she had walked it from both sides and knew where the reliable footholds were, and where the path looked solid but was not. She had been keeping notes, she said, since the day she left, everything she thought she might need to convey to someone who could help. You prepared this before you knew whether there would be anyone to give it to, I said. I prepared it because there had to be, she said. Whether there was someone to give it to was the question I was walking toward. The notes were the answer I would bring either way. I was quiet for a moment. Something in that, the plain, settled logic of it, the absence of the special pleading or the desperate hope I would have expected from someone who had been through what she had been through, settled in my chest in a way I did not examine very carefully. I asked more questions. She answered all of them. When I left, I found myself at the east wing door longer than I needed to be, looking back through the stone corridor at the room where she had turned back to her herbs. The cold in my chest did a thing it had not done before. Not a pull exactly, not a pressure. Something more like a breath, a brief, inexplicable warmth where there was usually only the ordinary temperature of my own heartbeat, like walking past a door behind which there is a fire in the hearth, and feeling the warmth at the edge of it for 3 steps before it fades. 3 seconds, then back to the ordinary cold. I stood still for a moment, trying to identify what it was and could not, and walked away. By the second evening, 12 wolves. They were more brazen about it now. They sat in the east wing corridor and the outer garden with the patient certainty of creatures who understood something and were simply waiting for the rest of us to catch up. One of them, a young gray named Bryn, who was ordinarily too high-spirited to sit still for more than 30 seconds, and who preferred the outer yards and the open air in almost all circumstances, had apparently been inside the room itself, because Perla reported finding gray fur on the hearthrug. Bryn had never, to anyone's knowledge, gone into a closed room unless she was being kept there for a reason. Bryn was constitutionally opposed to enclosed spaces. Bryn ran the perimeter of the outer courtyard in large, pointless, exuberant loops when the mood took her, which was often. Bryn's idea of a morning was one that involved as much movement as possible. Bryn was sitting in the corridor outside Lyra's door when I passed it that evening, and she thumped her tail once when she saw me, the way she always did, and then turned back to face the door as though I were a minor interruption, and she had more important things to attend to. I checked on Lyra. She was teaching herself the Vornstead pack calendar from a wall hanging that had been left in the east wing from the previous healer's time, a grid of lunar phases marked in the old way, with the symbols for the 3 great wolf runs of the year, the ceremony markers, the seasonal hunt patterns. She was studying it with the same careful attention she gave to everything, the way you study something when you intend to understand it, not just recognize it. I saw that she had already made a small notation in the margin at one of the dates, a question mark, neat and precise, in the handwriting of someone who marked things they intended to come back to. "You are planning to go back for them," I said. "I told them I would," she said. "I said a month. It has been 2 days. I have 28 left." "You cannot cross the Ashvin Pass alone again," I said. "Not in this weather, and not with 11 people including someone expecting a child. The pack can put together a proper crossing with experienced guides and supplies." "The child will come in the spring," she said, not angry, just exact. Precise in the way she was about everything, the way someone is precise when they have spent time with a reality that does not care about hope or optimism, only about facts and timing. Early April at the latest. A spring crossing takes until late March to arrange safely. The arithmetic does not work. I thought about it. "I will find a way," I said. I did not entirely know why I said it with the certainty I said it with, rather than the more careful "I will look into it" or "I will put people to work on the question" that I would normally use when I was not yet certain of a solution. But I said it, and I meant it, and I met her eyes when I did, and she looked at me for a long moment with an expression I could not entirely read. "Thank you," she said. And then, in a slightly different tone, as though the words surprised her a little, "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" I said. She thought about it with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Someone larger," she said, "and considerably less patient." I left before I did something foolish, like smile in front of her before I had thought through what that meant. By the fourth day, the wolves numbered 23. By the sixth, 40. They were no longer confined to the corridor outside her door. They had spread through the east wing's outer garden, the stone terrace that backed against the kitchen wall, and the covered walkway between the east and main wings. They moved with the loose, purposeful ease of creatures who had decided that a particular area of the fortress was now theirs to attend to, and they had organized themselves into something that looked, if you squinted at it, like a watch. Certain wolves in certain positions, rotating in the way the pack rotated its patrols. Not frantic, not demanding, simply present in the way wolves are present when they are committed to something. The kitchen staff had adapted with the pragmatic tolerance of people who had lived alongside wolves all their lives. The council had not. Austin came to me on the sixth evening with a carefully written list. He always brought a list when he was about to make an argument he knew I was going to resist, because he believed that a point written down was harder to dismiss than a point spoken. He was not wrong. I had learned to read his lists the way other kings read dispatches from contested territories, carefully, looking for what was not said as much as what was. 40 wolves, he said, have congregated around the east wing where the wolfless outsider is housed. The pack has not behaved this way in living memory. There are traditions, Alpha, there are very old traditions in Vornstead law that speak to what it means when the pack chooses without being led. I know the traditions, Austin. Then you know that if this continues, the law's implications are. I know what the law says. I looked at him. I also know that it has been 6 days, and she has not solicited the wolves' attention in any way I have been able to observe, and that the law speaks of a choosing made freely and held to over time, not a convergence of 6 days' duration that might have any number of explanations. I let that settle. We will let it continue and see what it is. If it holds at 40 for another 2 weeks without any further movement, then we have an interesting pattern. If it grows, we discuss the law. He left. I could tell from the set of his shoulders that he thought I was delaying for reasons he understood and did not approve of, and he was not entirely wrong. But I was also telling the truth. I did not know, with the certainty the law required, what this was, and I was not going to act on the law until I did. I sat with the word choosing for a long time that night, alone in my study with the fire burning low and the wind off the Ashfin range pressing against the outer wall. The law was old. It had been written in the time of my grandfather's grandfather, and it said, in the careful, bone-simple language that the old codes always used, the language that had survived this long because it was too clear to be misread, that if the pack's wolves freely chose a woman, without being led or called or coaxed, and held to that choosing across the turning of days, she was pack-marked by destiny. She was the true Luna of Vornstead. And if the Alpha King had not yet named a mate, the choosing was binding in the same way the bond mark was binding. Not a suggestion, not a recommendation, but a fact of the pack's nature that the king could acknowledge or refuse, and that refusing had consequences the law described in some detail. It said nothing about a wolfless outsider. It said nothing about a betrothal ceremony that was 5 days away. The law had been written for a world where these things did not coexist, and so it said nothing about what to do when they did. I told myself it was a coincidence. Wolves were drawn to new scents, new people, new things in their territory. She worked with herbs, Perhaps there was something in the dried plants she carried that the wolves found interesting or calming. Some of the plants a traveling healer used were known to have effects on wolf scents, a mild version of the attraction that certain pack medicines produced when burned. It was possible. It was entirely possible. The cold in my chest when I tried to believe it was, for the first time, clearly cold. Not the warmth. Not the breath of something recognizing something. Just the ordinary cold of a man telling himself something that his body had stopped agreeing with. I went to the east wing. I told myself I was going to check on the wolves. She was not sorting herbs. She was sitting on the stone floor of the outer garden with her back against the warm kitchen wall, and the cold did not seem to trouble her the way it troubled people who had not grown up on the eastern face of the Ashfin Range, which was a cold that asked more of you than the fortress kind, and in exchange taught you not to waste energy being bothered by it. She had 3 wolves arranged around her with the ease of creatures who had been there long enough to fall asleep. A large silver-gray female was asleep with her head on Lyra's knee. One of the younger males was sitting upright at her left shoulder with his chin resting on the top of her head in a way that communicated enormous affection and entirely no dignity. A third was curled at her feet with its nose tucked under its own tail. She was talking to them quietly, not the kind of talking a person does when they are performing warmth for an audience, the kind they do when they are alone and thinking aloud, and the wolves were simply there and it felt natural to include them. She was describing her plan for the crossing, the route through the lower foothills, the provisions required, what the elderly couple would need for the first day. Her voice was low and even, the way it was when she was working. The wolves were listening, ears angled toward her. The sleeping female's paw twitched once in the way of a wolf, deeply at rest and comfortable enough to dream. I stood in the doorway for a long time. "They come on their own," she said, without looking up. She knew I was there. I do not know precisely when she had begun to know where I was, somewhere in the 3rd or 4th day, I thought, because the wolves told her things before I was near enough to make a sound. "I see that," I said. "It makes me think I remind them of someone," she said, "or something, some scent that they associate with safety or comfort or a person they remember." She paused. "I hope I am not distressing them by not being the thing they remember." "I do not think they are distressed," I said. I watched the silver-gray female's ears shift, soft and slow, at the sound of my voice, recognizing me, welcoming me into the space the way a wolf welcomes a known person into a space it has claimed as safe. The young male on her shoulder opened one eye, gave me the look wolves gave to things they had already assessed and found acceptable, and closed it again. I think they are exactly where they want to be. I sat on the stone bench at the garden's edge. The cold settled around us both. The fire from the kitchen came through the wall in steady waves of warmth, and the snow was light outside the garden wall, not the hammering kind, just the small quiet kind that falls when a storm has moved on and left only its memory. Lyra went on talking through her plans in a low voice, to the wolves and to herself, and I think to me, the order of the crossing, what she had learned about the pass's 2 possible lower routes, which of the 11 people would need the most help on the 2nd day. Somewhere in the inner courtyard, the pack run was just starting, the sound of 40 or 50 wolves moving at speed over frozen ground, that particular sustained thunder that was unlike any other sound in the world if you had grown up hearing it, the sound of your kingdom fully alive. And it was, somehow, peaceful, not in spite of that sound, but with it. I stayed for 2 hours. When I left, the warmth behind my ribs stayed with me longer than before. Lady Marin of Solvin arrived 3 days before the betrothal ceremony, as protocol required. She came with a retinue of 30 pack leaders, legal advisors, senior attendants, and rode through the main gate of Vornstead on a white horse with the composed, prepared bearing of a woman who had been thinking about this moment for 3 years and had decided exactly who she intended to be in it. She was accomplished in every way the alliance required. She was handsome and sharp-minded, and she governed her pack's eastern farms with an efficient authority that had tripled their yield in 5 years. She was exactly the kind of leader who, matched with Vornstead, would create a northern alliance that could hold for a generation. She had no cruelty in her. She was, in every measurable way, the right match for the kingdom I governed. She was simply not my mate. I had known that with the low, quiet certainty of a fact you acknowledge and set aside, because the alternative was to spend your life waiting for something that might not come and let the kingdom run itself in the meantime. I was 37. The bond was, as my old pack seer had told me once with the gentle precision of someone giving information they wished were different, not a guarantee. It was a possibility. It came to some kings and not to others. It came late sometimes, too late for the kingdom's needs, and plenty of alpha kings had made good, dignified, loyal, mutually respectful matches without it, and those kingdoms had been none the worse. I had made my peace with that. I had believed I had made my peace with that. The cold in my chest when I met Marin at the gate was perfectly ordinary. There was nothing in it. No warmth, no breath, no 3-second fire. There was courtesy and respect and the familiar weight of my own authority and the knowledge that we were about to do something that mattered for many people who were not us. All of those things were real. All of them were, in their way, enough. I showed Marin to her quarters. We had a formal first meeting in the great hall, the kind that was more ritual than conversation. Both sides arranged, the lore eaters present, the initial acknowledgments made. Then a private dinner, which was actually quite pleasant. She was easy to talk to in the way of people who read widely and think carefully, and we had been corresponding long enough that there were things we had in common, shared opinions on border law and the management of the eastern trade routes, and it was not uncomfortable. It was good. It was, in the honest assessment of the part of my mind that was not thinking about the East Wing, genuinely good, and I was not performing gratitude for it. Marin's lead advisor, a man named Sullivan, found me after the dinner and asked in passing what I had done with the Eastern outsider he had heard about from the Border Scouts' reports. I explained Lyra's situation and the 11 people briefly and factually. Sullivan looked at me with the look of a man who had seen negotiations nearly founder at the last moment on unexpected complications. "And the wolves," he said. I said the wolves were being observed. He pressed his lips together in the exact way Austin did, which made me wonder if there was a school for it somewhere, a course of study for advisors in how to communicate disagreement without technically disagreeing. "The ceremony is in 3 days," he said. "I am aware of when the ceremony is," I said. He left. I went to the East Wing that evening. There were 68 wolves in the outer garden, the corridor, and the covered walkway, not pressed against each other, not frantic, simply present, attending, the way wolves attended something they had decided was permanently theirs. Lyra was inside. I could hear her moving, the small sounds of her evening routine, and the wolves' awareness of those sounds was visible in the way their ears tracked her through the stone wall. Every head angled slightly toward her position, all 68 of them, with the unanimity of a thing that has been decided. I stood at the garden entrance for a long while. The warmth came again, stronger this time, not the brief 3-second version, but a longer, slower settling, something behind my ribs that did not leave, a quiet. I went inside. She was writing at the table, the letter to the settlement, which she had asked Perla for paper and ink to compose, for the next supply run that would carry it through the Border Scouts' relay to the eastern foothills, and, if the wind was kind, to someone who could get it over the lower pass to the 11 people in the store building. She stopped when I came in. 68 tonight, I said. 69, she said. Bryn came in through the window again. I looked. Bryn was, in fact, inside, curled in a specific square of candlelight near the fire with the boneless contentment of a wolf who had achieved precisely what she had set out to achieve and intended to enjoy it without guilt. Bryn did not look up. Lyra set down her pen. She looked at me for a moment, and then she looked at the table, and then she said, in a quieter tone than she usually used, the tone of something that had been sitting with her and had decided it was time. I want to be honest with you, because you have been honest with me, and because you are the one this situation is actually affecting. Say it, I said. I do not know what the wolves want from me, she said, but I know what the old pack songs say about this kind of thing. I grew up with them on the east side versions, but the root is the same as yours, the same ceremony language and the same law. I know what the old code says about a choosing. She looked at me steadily. I am not here for that. I am not here to disrupt what you have arranged or complicate what your kingdom needs. I came through that pass for one reason, and I intend to see it through. A pause. I am not trying to make anything difficult for you. I know that, I said. Do you? She said, not unkindly, genuinely. I thought about the warmth behind my ribs, which was there now, warm and settled, not a pull but a presence. I thought about the way the cold in my chest had not moved when Marin arrived. I thought about Bryn, who had never in her life chosen a closed room, sleeping in a square of candlelight 3 feet from my feet, with the entirely peaceful expression of a creature who had never been more correctly placed in her life. I know that you are not trying to make anything difficult, I said. I also know that the wolves have been choosing for 6 days without being led or called or coaxed, and that the law does not ask for intention. I looked at her. I am not laying that on you as an accusation. I am telling you what is true. She was quiet for a long moment. I know what is true too, she said at last, very quietly. Neither of us said anything more about it that night. She went back to her letter. I sat and watched the candle burn. The wolves outside breathed in their slow chorus, and the warmth in my chest stayed where it was, and I knew, with the part of me that had been a wolf-bonded alpha king for 14 years and knew how to read what the pack told him, that the conversation we had just had was a beginning, not a resolution, and that the ceremony was in 3 days, and that I had not thought of what honest looked like yet, and that I needed to. I had not, by the morning of the ceremony day. The feast was set for the great hall, the largest room in the fortress, with its 12 carved wolf columns and the long central hearth that could warm 300 people on a cold night. The tradition was a first shared feast between the 2 packs, formal, witnessed, the Alpha King and the proposed Luna seated together at the head table, the bond between them acknowledged before both packs, the clasping of hands before the elders, the formal declaration of intent. It was not the full mating ceremony. That would come later if and when we both chose it. This was the declaration. Once given publicly, before both packs and the lore readers, it was binding. It was the thing you could not undo without consequences that rippled outward for years. I had dressed in my full winter formal, the dark fur-lined coat, the Vornstead crest at my collar, the heavy chain of office that marked the Alpha's seat. Marin was in silver white, composed and ready, and she looked as a proposed Luna was expected to look, assured, dignified, prepared. My council was arranged behind me in their positions. Her retinue was behind her. The pack elders from both sides had taken their places along the sides of the hall. The fire in the central hearth was built high. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. Selvarn had not come. This was the thing I had been carrying quietly since dawn, when his keeper had come to find me and told me, apologetically, as though it were something he had failed at rather than something that was simply true, that the great wolf was not in his wing. The keeper had checked the outer walls, the high garden, all of Selvarn's usual nighttime routes. He was not there. He had not been seen since the previous evening. Selvarn was the oldest wolf in Vornsted's recorded history. 293 years, by the pack records, which put him at a birth year 3 years before my grandfather's grandfather had been born, and meant he had lived through 7 Alpha Kings and God knew how many ceremonies and wars and winters. He was enormous, the size of a small horse in his prime, and still large now, silver-white going to full gray at the muzzle and the paws. his eyes carrying everything he had accumulated over centuries in the sharp, unhurried way of creatures who have more time than urgency. He had been in his own wing of the fortress since my father's time, tended well, left to his own movement and his own rhythms. Selvarn had not attended a ceremony in 40 years. He had not, by the memory of anyone living or recently dead, fully chosen a person, laid his great head in a lap, wagged his tail, done the things the old pack songs described the bondwolf doing in 300 years. Not since the death of the last Luna of Vornstead, who had died in the winter of my grandfather's birth and whose passing had, the record said, broken something in the great wolf that the centuries had not entirely mended. I had made my peace with that too. You made peace with many things over 14 years of kingship. You learned to hold the things you could not change at the distance where they no longer cut you. The feast began. I sat beside Marin. The food was brought in the ceremonial order, the winter courses, the pack bread, the shared cup. The conversation moved as it was meant to. Marin was composed and warm in the right proportions, and I was exactly the king I was supposed to be, and the hall was full and lit and loud with the gathered sound of two packs beginning to know each other. I was doing all of it correctly, and I was watching myself do all of it correctly, and the warmth was not there, not the east wing kind, not the breath behind the ribs kind. There was the respect and the duty and the knowledge of what this meant for the kingdom. All real, all true, all cold. Then I heard her voice. Not in the hall. From the corridor behind the great hall's east wall, the passage that ran between the hall and the east wing, the one the kitchens used for the back service route. Low and not quite singing, not quite talking. The sound a person makes when they are very concentrated on something, and the sound fills the space around them without being entirely chosen, the way a fire fills a room with its warmth without trying. A border lullaby. I had not heard a border lullaby in 20 years. They were Ashfin tradition, not Vornstead, and the eastern contact had been gone since before my father's time, but the rhythm of it found something in my memory that I had not known was there, some old bone knowledge of what that sound was for, a keeping together, a thing you sang in the cold to tell the cold that the warmth was holding. A wounded wolf had been brought in 2 days before, one of the outer wall runners who had taken a bad fall in the storm and was being kept in the east wing infirmary passage for quiet and rest. Lyra had been tending it. She was in the passage then, kneeling beside the wolf in the straw, doing what she did, keeping company, keeping her hands busy, keeping the quiet alive with that sound. I felt it then. Not a breath, not the 3-second warmth of fire. It went through my left wrist first, like a brand, except that a brand is only pain, and this was something else entirely. Pain and recognition together. The way a thing feels when it finally becomes what it was always going to be. I looked down. Through the cuff of my formal coat, the skin of my left wrist was lit, not glowing the way a lamp glows, but shining from within, the way embers shine in the dark when the wind touches them. Old, certain, unmistakable. The bond mark. The alpha's mark that the old law said could only be called by one person, and that person was the true mate, and it could not be faked, and it could not be delayed past the moment it came for you, and it could not be argued with or explained away as coincidence or circumstance or 40 days of wolves sitting outside a door in a corridor. I stood up from the table. In the same moment, at the far end of the hall, the great doors from the inner wing opened. Selvarn came through them. The hall went quiet the second the doors moved. Every wolf-born person in the room knew what that sound meant, those doors, at that weight, moving without a human hand. Every pair of eyes found him when he appeared, because there were things you recognized even if you had never seen them, that the pack knowledge carried in you like old music. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried certainty of something that has decided, and that decision has the weight of 3 centuries behind it. He walked the full length of the hall, past the lore eaters, past my council, past the gathered pack elders of both territories, past Marin, who sat with the composed stillness of a woman who was reading what was happening with absolute accuracy and absorbing it with the dignity it deserved. Past me with a single slow look that said everything it needed to say and nothing it did not. Finally, the word was in his eyes as clearly as if he had spoken it. He walked through the hall's east door and into the corridor behind it, and the sound of his paws diminished in the direction of the infirmary passage, and the hall was entirely silent. I looked at my left wrist. Then I walked out of the hall. The east wing passage was lit by 4 torches set into the stone, and the wounded wolf was in the low alcove at the passage's middle point, lying in the deep straw the infirmary keeper had laid for rest and warmth. Selvarn was there already folded down on the straw beside it, that enormous silver body arranged with the careful patience of a creature who has made a decision about where it belongs and is prepared to demonstrate that for as long as demonstration is required. Lyra was kneeling between them. She had stopped singing. She was looking at her own left wrist, where the sleeve of her traveling coat she had not dressed for the feast. She had not been invited to the feast, and she had not asked to be, had been pushed back by the sleeve's own weight, and the skin of her wrist was lit in the same way mine was. The same mark. The same old fire under the skin. Her face was utterly still, not afraid, not stunned. Still in the way of someone who has just had something confirmed that they had been carrying as a question for days, and who is deciding what to do with the answer. She looked up at me when I came into the passage. "I know what this is," she said. "I know you do," I said. "I was not," she began. "I know," I said. I stood at the passage entrance for a moment, looking at her. She was kneeling in the straw of a fortress infirmary passage in a traveling coat that was 2 winters old, with her dried herb pouches at her belt, and her letter to the 11 people half finished on the table 3 rooms away, and Selvarn's great silver head, that head that had not rested willingly in anyone's hands for 300 years, lying across her knees with the settled, irreversible peace of a thing that has come home. She had done nothing to bring this here. She had walked through a mountain pass to ask for help for 11 people, and the rest had arranged itself around her, as the rest always arranges itself around the thing the pack has been waiting for without knowing it was waiting. I held out my hand. She looked at it, then at Selvarn's great patient face, then at the mark on her own wrist, still burning. "I need to finish the letter," she said. "I know. And there are 11 people who need a safe crossing before the month's end, and I intend to hold you to the arrangement we discussed." "You will," I said. "I have already assigned the guides." "And I do not know this kingdom yet," she said. "You have 28 days fewer ignorance than you did when you arrived," I said. "You will learn the rest." "And you have a hall full of people waiting for an explanation," she said. "I know that too," I said. I kept my hand where it was. She looked at my face, at my hand, at the mark burning on my wrist, steady and certain, the way it had been since the moment her voice had come through the stone wall. She looked at Selvarn, whose tail was moving, slowly, back and forth through the straw, that great old tail that had not moved in any living person's memory, moving with the steady, unhurried happiness of a thing that has been patient for 3 centuries and finds the patience entirely worth it. Lyra put her hand in mine. The mark flared gold both of ours together, a brightness that came through the stone walls and reached the hall behind us, and I heard the murmur of it, the collective sound of a room absorbing something it had been told by the law was possible but had never expected to witness. The bond came in fully then, the way it came when it had been held at the edge of itself for too long. Not an arriving, more a settling. More like something that had always been there, on both sides of the Ashfin Range, on both sides of a border neither of them had been able to cross until the mountain made room, coming into its final shape. I walked her into the hall. She came without hesitation, not bravely or not only bravely, with the same straight, direct quality she had had when she turned to face 4 mounted border riders in a snowstorm. She came into a hall full of 2 packs and their leadership and a proposed betrothal that was about to be remade, and she held my hand, and she did not flinch. Marin was the first to stand. She read what she was looking at, the mark on both wrists, the great wolf behind us, my face, with the speed of someone who understood the law completely and had, I think, understood the shape of this possibility before I had. She inclined her head, first at me, then at Lyra, the full, formal acknowledgement of a pack leader who has seen something that supersedes the arrangements and is choosing to receive it with the grace her own character required. "I release the declaration," she said, clearly carrying to every corner of the room, freely and without contest. She sat. Her advisor Solvin had his jaw set and his mouth pressed shut, but he did not speak. There was nothing to say. There was no argument to make against a bond mark, and 300 wolves and Selvarn's tail still moving in the passage behind us. I stood at the head table with Lyra beside me. I said the words the old law required, the declaration of the bond's recognition, the naming, the formal claim made before both packs. The words were short and direct, the same words that had been said in this hall before in the rarest of circumstances, when the bond came and could not be set aside. I said them so every elder in the room heard them clearly. I named her. The pack elders made the notation. Both packs witnessed. Then I said, before I sat, before anything else was said or done, 11 people across the Ashfin Pass need a safe crossing before the month's end. 2 guides leave at dawn. Provisions are already allocated. I looked at Austin. It is not a discussion. Write it in the morning record. Austin wrote it down. The hall held its silence for one long breath, the silence of a room in which something has just settled into its permanent shape. And then outside, the pack wolves howled. All of them. 300 wolves in the old sound that the pack song said meant the bond is whole, the line is certain, the pack is not alone. I cannot describe it to anyone who has not grown up hearing it. It was not frightening. It was the opposite of everything frightening. It was the sound a kingdom makes when it recognizes what it was always meant to be, and knows it will not be otherwise again. The feast continued. It continued in the changed way that things continue after something permanent has occurred, the conversation still moving, the food still on the tables, but with a different quality in the room, a kind of settled warmth that had not been there before. Marin stayed for the whole of it, which was the act of grace I respected most in her, and which I told her so later. Her pack and mine ate together. It was, in its way, still an alliance, not the arranged kind. The kind that the law had always said was the only lasting sort. Lyra ate 3 things from the table before she said she was going to check on the wounded wolf in the passage. I let her go and watched the door, and 3 minutes later Bryn went through it, and then 4 more wolves, and then Selvarn's keeper appeared in the doorway looking uncertain, and I waved him off. I found them all in the passage when the feast concluded, Lyra and the wounded wolf, and what appeared to be most of the pack's smaller members, arranged in the straw with the complete contentment of creatures that had made exactly the arrangement they had intended to make, and were not considering any alternatives. In the morning, the 11 people's crossing was arranged. In the second morning after that, the guides came back with word that the path through the lower foothills was clear and passable with proper equipment, and that a relay had been established, and that the 11 people, and the elderly couple, and the woman expecting her child in the spring, would be at the fortress gate within 10 days if the weather held. It held. Selvarn did not return to his own wing. He was found each morning at the threshold of the east wing's outer door, just inside the stone arch, in the warmth where the kitchen fires pushed their heat through the old walls, curled with his nose on his paws and his breathing deep and slow and utterly peaceful. The infirmary keeper came to tell me the first morning, because in 300 years no one had seen Selvarn sleep through the night. He had always risen before dawn, always resumed the walk along the outer walls, always held himself in the patient, enormous stillness of a creature that was waiting. He was not waiting anymore. Lyra was in the outer courtyard when I came to see early, before the fortress had fully risen. She was standing in the cold with her face turned toward the pale sky to the east, checking the weather the way she always did, the habit of someone who had grown up needing to read the sky before anything else. The pack was around her in the courtyard, not all of them, but many, in the loose and easy way they took when they were simply content. No urgency, no attention required, just the pleasure of being exactly where they meant to be. She turned when she heard me. "He's sleeping," I said. "I know," she said. I heard him settle. There was something in her voice when she said it, quiet and very full, the way a voice is full when it is holding something too large for any word but the simplest ones. "I think he will sleep often now." "I think so too," I said. I stood beside her in the early cold. The mark on my wrist was quiet now, present and warm, not burning, just there the way fire is there when you are not looking at it directly, but the room is warmer for it. The pack breathed around us. The sky to the east was doing what winter skies do after a long storm has finally spent itself, going pale and clean, the kind of pale that precedes the morning with the quality of something that has decided it has nothing left to hide. "I will need the rest of your notes," I said. "The route details, the 11 people's conditions. I want to have everything ready before they arrive." "I have them organized," she said. "I have been adding to them." "Of course you have," I said. She looked at me with the expression that was not quite the small private smile, but was the thing that preceded it. "You keep saying that," she said. "Because it keeps being true," I said. The smile came then, real and brief, and entirely her own, there for half a second before she turned back to the sky. The pack moved in the courtyard with the slow, easy certainty of 300 wolves that have found what they were always looking for and are not going anywhere. Somewhere behind us, at the east wing threshold, the oldest wolf in Vornsted's history went on sleeping, in the deep and peaceful way of a creature that has nothing left to wait for. The morning came in over the ridge. The cold was clean. The warmth did not leave.